We would all like to believe that monsters exist only in horror films, and that once the film ends, we can go back to the safety of our homes and forget about the evil we have just witnessed. Sadly, this is untrue, and there are very scary people walking the streets every day involved in true crime stories that you wouldn't believe. Number 5. Those in Ukraine knew Sirai as an upstanding member of the community for his hard work as a criminal investigator. Little did they know that Sirai was actually one of the very scary people that he had dedicated his life to hunting down and putting behind bars. He had been born in Russia in 1952 and was around to see what many viewed as the glory days of the Soviet Union. Lying was second nature to Sirai, and in his early 20s, he began telling his neighbors that he had served in the army and had been to Afghanistan. This was a lie that Sirai would keep until his arrest. The reality was that he had only completed the second mandatory term in the armed forces before becoming a police officer. After becoming an officer, he trained as a criminal investigator. Sirai would get caught in his lies, and after being caught falsifying evidence at the Ministry of Internal Affairs school, he was forced to leave Russia and start a new life in Ukraine. Once in Ukraine, he got work as a criminal investigator once more, and in 1984, women in eastern Ukraine began mysteriously disappearing. Residents put their faith in men like Sirai, only to find out decades later that he was a monster hiding in plain sight. Between 1984 and 2005, Sirai was believed to have taken the lives of over 100 women. He used his police knowledge to avoid capture. He would commit his crimes near railway lines that had recently been tarred so that police dogs would struggle to pick up a scent. For decades, Sirai went undetected and lived under the guise of serving and protecting the community. In mid-2005, Sirai was taken out of his apartment in handcuffs after the police had finally caught up to him. When confronted, Sirai admitted everything, although the Ukrainian police were only able to formally charge him in 37 cases. Sirai made headlines again in 2015 when he married 25-year-old Elena, who had sent him letters in prison after seeing his case on TV in Russia. The pair even went on to have a daughter, as prisoners in Ukraine are allowed a 3-day conjugal visit every 2 months. The couple were even featured in the documentary World's Toughest Prisons, where Elena proudly talked to the host and crew about her husband. In 2018, for reasons unknown, their relationship soured and Elena stopped visiting her husband. In November of that year, Sirai passed away. His remains were placed in an unmarked grave because neither Elena nor his surviving family members wished to claim them. Number 4. There is some contention as to whether the Argentine vampire ever really existed. Some Argentinian news outlets seem to doubt and discredit the whole story. But no matter what you believe, it doesn't make the supposed crimes of the Argentine vampire any less terrifying. In the 1950s, Florencio Fernandez was responsible for a string of crimes in Monteros, Argentina, that earned him the nickname of the Argentine Vampire. Florencio had an attraction to blood, and once he found a female victim he liked, he would follow her for days on end, noting down her routine and finding out when she would be home alone. Once he was satisfied, Florencio ramped up and took things to another level. He would sneak into his victims' homes through an open window before launching his attack. His method of attack differed each time, but he left behind the same calling card, a bite mark to signify that he had taken what he wanted. The women of Monteros became terrified of being in their own homes, and were dissatisfied that the local police force had failed to catch the creepy man on the loose. After years of trying and failing, the Monteros police called in the help of the federal police, who brought with them more up-to-date scientific methods. The federal police created a map of the crime scenes and found that they were all centrally placed around a cave where 25-year-old Florencio Fernandez lived. Florencio was known as the Luz Loquito of Monteros, and the federal police placed him under surveillance. One evening in February of 1960, the federal police caught Florencio in the act as he was climbing through the window of an apartment where a lone woman lived. Florencio knew that the game was up and went with the federal police to the police station. Some reports state that Florencio was almost relieved to be caught. During a psychiatric evaluation, Florencio was found unfit to stand trial due to suffering from schizophrenia and being incredibly unstable. He would pass away in 1968 from natural causes. At least that's what was reported to the media at the time. Many people in Argentina believe that while Florencio was a real person, he was not the person responsible for the scary crimes that happened. Without a re-examination of the evidence, it's unlikely that we will ever know. Number 3. Australia is a land of sunshine, beaches, and barbecues, and one of the last places on Earth you'd expect to find scary, insane people. Between 1984 and 2009, the residents of Victoria, Australia, were haunted by a serial killer who claimed the lives of 3 people and impacted the lives of millions, shattering the notion that they lived in a small, peaceful community where things like this just didn't happen. In 1984, John, along with Andrew Opie, entered the home of Henry Kells. According to their testimony, the two did not intend to take Kells' life, but only wanted to harm him and intimidate him. During his trial, John claimed that he was under the influence of several things, and that he wasn't in his right state of mind. While the crime shocked the community, John's sentence was even more shocking. John Leslie Coombs was originally sentenced to life imprisonment. However, following a review, he was given just 11 years when a report stated that in spite of his offense, which did not seem premeditated, he does not pose a substantial threat to the community. The community were outraged when John Leslie Coombs was released in 1996 and allowed to live among them as a free man. Kells' family were appalled that the person responsible was free to walk the streets. Meanwhile, their loved ones would never get that chance again. Then, in December of 1996, John Leslie Coombs was arrested once again, this time for his involvement in the 1984 disappearance of Michael Peter Spirani. Spirani was last seen when he left for a fishing trip, telling his friends and family that he would be home within a few hours. But as the hours passed and there was no sign of him, they knew something was very wrong. It wasn't until Michael's body was found near Port Phillip Bay that the investigation was taken seriously and ended with an unlikely suspect being charged. Again, John managed to talk his way out of his crimes and ended up serving 11 years of a 10-year minimum sentence. In 2007, he was once again released into society. John had somehow managed to convince psychiatrists and the parole board that he was a changed man, but deep down he was exactly the same. It would take a third and final crime for the authorities in Victoria to realize that they had been played. 2 years later, the state of Victoria was hit with another crime involving John Leslie Coombs. 27-year-old Rachel Betts was found in the home of Nicole Godfrey on Phillip Island after she and John had gotten into an argument. During the trial, it was revealed that Nicole was in the house at the time of the offense and knew what was going on. It also alleged that Nicole and John began a sexual relationship following the crime, and Nicole helped John cover up evidence. For her involvement, Nicole was sentenced to just 3 years for attempting to pervert the course of justice. Meanwhile, John Leslie Coombs was handed down an indefinite life sentence, with the Victorian courts making sure that he would never make it out of prison. John Leslie Coombs will now spend the rest of his life in the Port Phillip prison. Number 2. 29-year-old Darius Katwicka is one of Europe's most dangerous criminals that you've never even heard of. In mid-2015, Darius embarked on a spree that saw him committing crimes in Sweden, Austria, the Netherlands, Czechia, and the UK. These are just some of the countries where Darius is believed to have been active. But now other members of the European Union are re-examining evidence to see if the man, known as Europe's first traveling serial killer, is linked to any of the other unsolved crimes. In 2015, Darius attacked pensioners in the countries previously mentioned, although there have only been convictions in Sweden and Austria. It's believed that he broke into his victims' homes before attacking them in their beds. Darius failed to provide the police with a motive, only telling them that he chooses his victims at random because he enjoys it. After committing his crimes in Austria, Darius made use of the open borders between the European countries and fled to Germany. By this time, the Austrian authorities were slowly catching up with him and alerted their neighbors to be on the lookout for a wanted criminal. Darius was only able to evade capture for so long, and by the end of November, he had been arrested and extradited to Austria to face the police. During his trial, Darius told psychiatrists that he had been hearing voices and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. While he was found guilty of his crimes, his diagnosis meant that he was transferred to a mental health treatment facility instead of a prison. Following his arrest, many countries across the EU, including the UK, began re-examining cold cases that fit Darius's MO. Darius had lived in the UK and other European countries before 2015. And now authorities in those countries are wondering whether he could be responsible for their unsolved cases. So far, Darius has not been convicted of any other crimes. He's expected to serve out his sentence in Austria before being extradited to another country. Number 1. In 2003, the residents of China were alerted to the fact that there was a scary person on the loose who was targeting young women. That man was Zhu Wen, an unassuming taxi driver who blended into the background and went about his daily life like hundreds of other people. In early June of 2003, young women began disappearing after getting taxi rides home, only to be found days later in a field or near wells. The women in the area became panicked at the news and began avoiding taxis altogether, opting to either take public transport in groups or stay at home entirely whenever possible. What these women didn't know was that Zhu, also dubbed the Taxi Demon, wasn't picking victims at random. He picked victims he believed were involved in certain professions, which greatly angered him. He would always wait until the sun went down to strike. When a lone woman got into his taxi, Zhu would strike up casual conversation with them and get to know more about them. Once he had enough information, he made a decision on what he wanted to do. For those unlikely women, Zhu drove them out to a remote area before attacking them and leaving their bodies to be found days later. Police quickly established that all of these women had taken a taxi and that they had all been picked up by one driver, Zhu Wen. In July of 2003, the crimes mysteriously stopped as quickly as they had begun. By November of 2003, Zhu Wen was arrested and charged in connection with the crimes, and during questioning, he admitted everything. He even gave the police a diary that detailed all of his crimes, sealing his fate. He told the police that his wife had done something to anger him, and that women in general angered him. So this was his way of getting revenge. Zhu's exact sentence is unknown, though many Chinese publications speculate that he has possibly been given a sentence of capital punishment. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.